So we've got lovely Stuart and Liz here, which is absolute pleasure, having you talk to us about challenging conversation. Stuart and Liz, probably it's best if I let you introduce yourself and what you do and how you came to this and what you're going to talk about. Is that okay?
Great, thank you.
Great, yes, okay. Well, yeah, I'm Stu, this is Liz, and we're actually down in the sharp end of Cornwall tonight. We're on a project with a group of schools, and that's mainly where our work is these days. We tend to work mainly in education, and we tend to work mainly with leaders in education. And, we can explain that, or the way that we see it is that if we can get leaders to actually see something for themselves around this, it's inevitable that they're going to feel motivated to want to share this with colleagues. And the ripple effect through the school is what we're really excited about, the potential through the school and then to the wider school community. And the bit that we have to keep reminding schools about is that there's a whole resource there of parents that they could tap into. And what would it be like if the school and the wider school community were seeing this understanding? It would just be a transformed community, I think. So that's mainly where we're operating at the moment. The project that we've been doing this week is we started it a couple of weeks ago, and we're working with 36 middle leaders who come from 15 schools in the Lizard area of Cornwall, which is, if you look on the map, it's right down at the pointed end, and it contains the most southerly point in the United Kingdom. So there's some remote areas, some very tiny schools with as few as 30 odd children, up to senior schools with sort of 1,500, 1,600 children. And they're still relatively small for the way that senior schools go. So we're really excited to be working on this project, and just one day with some of them today, they're sat there with their arms folded when they come in, and frankly, when they left today, 3:30, 3:45, they're saying, "Oh, this is fantastic. We'll see. Can't wait till next week." Really, it's just makes me so excited to be working in this way with them, and seeing just the feedback that we get from them in such a short space of time.
So one of the things, just to say up front, is that whilst we don't work directly with children, we're working with the adults that do work with children. And so one of the things that we often get asked when we're running a training program is like, well, one of the things I'd love to learn about is how to deal with challenging conversations. And so that's why we thought that would be a great topic today. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next 20 minutes just giving you a bit of an idea of how we might share this with people around what challenging conversations are, and give some examples of how people that we've worked with have interpreted what we've meant and what impact that has had. We're only going to spend probably 15-20 minutes on that, and then we're just going to open it up so that we can maybe collectively have a chat and see if there are things that other people see or questions that might be asked. So that's going to be the format.
And I'd add to that by saying that it's not just in the training that the issue of challenging conversations comes up. So when we're doing one-to-one coaching, they might not describe it as a challenging conversation, but what they're doing is they're trying to navigate their way through some potentially difficult relationships, let's say. And, fundamentally, we're talking about the same thing here. So it's a very common part of the work that we're doing, which is working with leaders who think that they're having some challenging conversations to fret over.
So I guess the question to start off with, and this is the question we would often ask, is, well, what is a challenging conversation? And the kinds of answers that we get back are just really handy, because one of the things we often realize quite soon is that what people perceive as a challenging conversation is really different. So one person, for example, might say, well, it's really challenging when we get an angry parent just come in and start shouting. And another person goes, oh no, I can deal with angry parents. What I can't deal with is I can't deal with it when my teaching assistant doesn't do what I ask her to do. And someone says, no, I can deal with teaching assistants. But what I find really challenging is when the head teacher calls me in for a conversation and I don't know what it's about. So immediately what we're finding is that when we say to people, what's a challenging conversation? One of the first things that we get back is that there isn't actually a template for what a challenging conversation actually is. And that gives us a really good starting point, really, to start to ask, well, what is actually a challenging conversation? We all think we know what a challenging conversation is, but what is it? What actually is it? And so that becomes our starting point.
Mm-hmm. The formula, it sounds like a Jamie Smart formula, this one, because I see it really simply, that a conversation plus interference equals a challenging conversation. And the interference is the bit that we're really curious about, because this is the bit that sometimes paralyzes them to the point where they just don't know what to do. It has an impact on them, potentially health-wise. It's quite pervasive when they get stuck and lost in this this sort of illusion that they've created for themselves. So a very simple formula, which is the conversation plus interference equals a challenging conversation.
And so then we really just want people to have a sense of, well, what is that interference? And so, for example, they can sit in our training room with a cup of tea and a biscuit in front of them, and they can imagine potentially challenging conversations, and they can feel quite upset inside and worried whilst they're sat in the training room with us. Now, that's a really great cue for us then to say, well, how come you're feeling those emotions right now in this moment when there is no challenging conversation? We're all just here having a conversation in the training room. What's going on? And so what's really helpful then is we're starting to get people to get curious about what's going on in their minds, what's going on in their thinking. And that's the interference that we're talking about when we talk about a challenging conversation. There is no such thing as a challenging conversation. There are lots of conversations. The challenge comes when we start to get trapped and caught up in a whirlwind of thinking. And when we start to sort out and to plan a challenging conversation from that space, well, that's often where we get unstuck. So one of the things we want to, first of all, have people realize is there is no one thing that is a challenging conversation. We've all got different ideas of what that is. And secondly, we want them to start to get present to the real impactive, physiologically impactive power that thought plays in the moment, even if they're not in a challenging conversation, but they're starting to imagine one. So we're starting to get curious that it's not something that's going on outside. This is about getting curious about what's going on the inside.
Yeah, so it was interesting just today. I was having a conversation with a head teacher. In fact, we've got some training with them tomorrow. And this head teacher, she actually raised something that I hadn't particularly thought about, but I think it's really useful to share with you. So she's realized for herself the stress and anxiety that she can cause for her colleagues when she tells them that she wants to have a conversation with them. Just that. She was getting feedback from people saying, oh, I've been worried half the night about why you want to see me today. So what she's learned for herself is, and through the training and the stuff that we've been sharing with her and her colleagues, is that when she's clear in her communication with her colleagues about why she wants to see them, because that's her job is about supervising, leading, managing, It's about holding people to account. It's often about just sort of day-to-day touching the tiller. But for that, she does need to make appointments with people to have a conversation. And that alone was having quite a negative impact for some of her colleagues. So she's now realized that when I'm clear with them about the nature of the conversation that I'm going to be having, then hopefully they're not going to get lost and caught up in their own crazy thinking, which is going to result in them being awake half the night. So I love that. I love that she sees the impact that she can have on people who can get lost in their thinking. So yeah, I'm really pleased about that bit.
So it's great. And
Okay.
and the thing that we often find when we're working with teachers is that they go, yeah, this mind stuff, it's great, but can you just give me a strategy? Like, what is the ultimate strategy to deal with a challenging conversation? And it's really understandable, because the world of teaching is about training the intellect, and it's about using the intellect to get you through exams and to help you work out problems and to remember things. And of course, part of what we have to start to help people realize is that this is a different kind of training. And we'll always set up the day and say, it's really likely that at some point during this day, you're going to get really, I call it scratchy, a bit inside, like, yeah, come on, what else have you got? And like, we're kind of saying, we've only got a couple of things to share with you, and we're just going to keep sharing them with you in different days. And so it's quite usual that people do get a bit scratchy inside. But what tends to happen is, as we keep pointing to the nature of how we work psychologically, so as people start to get clear that, yeah, it doesn't tend to happen as an epiphany, but it's that they start to question, well, yeah, so actually it's not that thing outside of me that's causing my stress. There's something that's going on for me internally that's causing my stress. They start to see chinks of light in that area. Then what they begin to realize is that you don't need a strategy. I mean, you can have a strategy, but when you understand the dynamic of what's going on for you psychologically, then also you'll know what's going on for the other person psychologically. You won't know what's going on in their heads, but you know the dynamic of what's going on. And when you have that as an understanding that underpins any conversation, then it sets up any conversation to have the best possible outcome that is possible. Because ultimately, if I go into a conversation and I've got a lot of interference and a lot of thinking going on in my head, then it's very unlikely that I'm going to connect with the other person. And actually what we find, and this is basically what our coaching now is boiled down to, is that when you connect with another person, with another human being, I think Chip Chipman, who's one of the trainers and facilitators in the 3 principles field, one of the things I think he said, which really resonated with me, is when you talk to another person behind their mask, from behind your mask. So you're talking from behind your mask, like the real authentic you, to the real authentic person that is in front of you, and you connect, then what you're having is a conversation. When you fall into the belief or the anxiety that this person doesn't like you, or they're thinking a certain thing, or this outcome might happen, well, at that point, you're in the interference. And when you realize that that's going on, that's the best leverage that you can have in any conversation to kind of get a sense of whether this conversation is going to pan out in a successful way. So we're constantly pointing people back to that we work from the inside out, and we constantly point people back to the fact that actually they have incredible resilience and wisdom inside. And when they start to have eyes for that, it naturally seems to emerge within the system, and that gives them insights and ways of connecting and communicating messages that need to be communicated.
And here's the laugh for me, which is that the people that we've come across in education are great with children. They're great with children. they can have these difficult conversations. When they're actually working with them, they're often coaching them. They're looking for them to come up with the solutions themselves, which is perfect. But we had one of them today. She said, yeah, we're great with kids, but we're not very good with each other as adults. And I just thought that was a great insight. And it's not the first time I've heard that. And certainly the experience I have is that, yeah, they can do have some great conversations with children around, you know, maybe something that potentially is seen as challenging, perhaps by the child, but they're really good at handling those situations. But when it comes to actually having a conversation with maybe a colleague about something that's been said that they didn't approve of, or that you know, maybe something that they're accountable for that they've not delivered on, that can get them all tangled up in knots.
So what we thought we'd do is we'd just give you a couple of examples of how this is played out with people that have sort of come up thinking that there's a challenging conversation they've got, but how we then shared it and how they then saw that challenging conversation. And what we'll do is I'll pause as well, because our background is we used to train people in coaching skills and a very conventional and traditional coaching approach. And I'll just point out the difference between how we might have dealt with somebody with the old way of doing it and how we would now point out the newer way around the principles and the inside out understanding.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story, and it's about a head teacher, and I'll call him Tom. He's not called Tom, but we'll call him Tom. And Tom is the head teacher of a primary school which has got about 200 children. So it's a reasonable sized primary school. And he's fairly young, I think, to be a head teacher. Maybe not, but you know, maybe the generation I am, I look at him in his early 30s and think he's doing really well to be a head teacher in his early 30s. And he had something that was causing him some real stress and anxiety, and it was about his deputy head. And he knew that he was going to have to sort a problem out. So the backstory is this, that the deputy head teacher, she used to be the head teacher. When she was approaching retirement, which I think is going to happen in the next 12 months, she wanted to step back from being a head teacher, and she spoke so highly about Tom and recommended him for the post that he became the head teacher. So he's now got the deputy head who was the previous head teacher. She's a career head teacher, very skilled, very experienced, and loved by everyone. Loved by the governors, loved by colleagues, loved by the community, highly regarded as the head teacher. And now she's his deputy head. And as part of her role, she was the lead over a cluster of schools for a particular subject area. And she had to deliver the work that would be shared across these schools. And Tom received a couple of complaints from different schools to say, we're really disappointed that this deputy head teacher, we'll call her Mary, that Mary hasn't delivered the goods, and that we can't actually get on and do our thing with our students. We can't deliver the curriculum because we actually don't know what it is that we've got to deliver yet.
So, and there was another point to that as well, which is Mary was actually best friends with Tom's mum.
She lived in the village. He said that he would often call around to see his mum, and she'd be there. He was even so paranoid about this that he said, if I've got to actually do something that results in her potentially leaving the school, or that she loses her job, I'm going to be persona non grata in the village. He said, my wife pushing the pram around, what happens if somebody comes up to her and says, your husband is a right so-and-so, he's done this to Mary and she's lost her job. He was even having these sorts of internal conversations with himself.
So here we go. Tom needs to have a conversation with Mary. Mary isn't delivering the goods, so it's clear that conversation needs to happen. And it looks like it's challenging because Mary recommended him for the job. Mary's loved by everybody at the school, the governors, the teachers, the children. Mary's is best friends with his mum. They live in the same village. So it looks to him like this conversation is going to be really challenging, not because he's got to have a conversation quite simplistically about a piece of work that's not being delivered. He's imagining in his mind a whirlwind of scenarios about what the outcome might be if he goes down, we call them rabbit holes, if he goes down any one or all of those rabbit holes. And so what we would have done traditionally in coaching is we would have worked with the story, and we might have said something like, right, so well, let's choose one of those things and shall we just see how we can work through it. So Tom might have then said, well, yeah, what I want to work with is if I have this conversation and if I bump into her and she's at my mum's house, how am I going to deal with that? And we go, right, well, let's look at that then. Can you see? But of course, in this understanding and with what we're sharing now, is it's very different. We don't actually want to go down any rabbit holes. We don't want to explore any worst case scenarios, because what we know is, as we pointed out earlier, that's just interference in the system. And the bit that's making this challenging is not the conversation that's about to take place. It's about all the layers of thinking that are going on. So
back to Tom. So with Tom, as part of the coaching and the training, we've shared this understanding. So it was a very simple process. The previous style of coaching would have been, this would have had to have been dealt with probably over a number of coaching sessions. But this is really easy because all we're doing is pointing him back all the time to the understanding. And when he could see for himself that all the extraneous thinking for him was stuff that he was creating in his own head, and at times his internal drama department was just running wild, then he just went quiet, and he could see for himself that, well, actually this is just stuff, isn't it? It's just stuff I've made up. And when he could see that, and I mean really see that for himself, everything just fell away. And I mean, the joy for us as coaches is just watching people go quiet, because that's when it's all happening. And so for him, he ended up by saying, it's okay, I know what to do now. The events, and I guess you want to know what happened next. That's usually the question. Well, what was really interesting was here was Tom having all these concerns about, her losing her job and him being seen as the villain of the piece and all this. And actually, when he set up a conversation with her to actually find out why she hadn't delivered the goods, well, she explained to him why. And that was that there were some ridiculous timescales. And he actually saw for himself that those ridiculous timescales made it impossible for her actually to do the work, to actually get it to the other schools in time for the new term starting. And so when he actually realized and appreciated that for himself, him and his colleagues were able to do something about it. So far from this being something which was a performance issue, this was something that was an organizational issue that he could attend to make her job much more achievable and just make things work easier. So for him, all that unnecessary thinking, he just looks back at now, and it's well, for him, it's just hilarious.
And that's the beauty of this, really, is that when you see through the mirage or the illusion of the fearful stuff that we're creating, because that's what makes conversations really challenging. When you see through it, then all you've got left is a conversation. And that's the bit we want to point out. And And I want to give another example, and this is a personal example for me, because sometimes we stumble into potentially challenging conversations that we didn't even have on our radar. And this happened to me recently. My parents are quite elderly, and my mum fell over. As there's 4 siblings, and we didn't know about this. And we've got a neighbour has got my phone number, and the deal is that she'll let me know if she thinks there's anything I need to know about my parents. And so she got hold of me and said, I just think you need to know that your mum fell over today in the garden. So I thought, okay, I now need to communicate with all my siblings. Now, I actually, in my mind, I thought I'm going to order this in difficulty of how I think that this conversation is going to land with my siblings. And I'm going to start off with the easiest one. So that was my expectation. And I phoned up my brother. He's in London, and he's my older brother. So I think he's going to fix this. You know, he's the one that knows what to do. And I just say, hey, brother, you just need to know Mum's had a fall, and I just want to let you know, because I want to let us all know, because I think we might need a conversation about it. So for me, I was in a really settled space, really connected, and for me it was like we just need to have a conversation to make sure Mum and Dad are safe and looked after. And now I don't know if you can relate to this, but all I can say is the way I think he heard it was, you're living in London, you're not doing enough, you need to really pull your finger out and help us down here in Devon, all right, because we're about, say, 300 miles away. And he seemed to respond from that space. So he was really agitated, and he was almost like saying, well, I'm really busy and I can't do this. I was thinking, well, hang on a sec, that is not what I was saying. It was like he completely misinterpreted what I was saying. Now, here's the beauty of having this understanding, because I'm not very enlightened, quite frankly. And in my head, I went into little sister mode, where I was going to point my finger and tell him a few home truths about what he was really like. That was like what went whoosh inside of me. But because I knew what was going on, I knew that I just need to distrust this at some level. And all I can say is that I had eyes for that little nudgy sort of feeling or voice that kind of said, now's not a good time to have that conversation about, all the angst you've had as you've grown up. And I just said to him, look, I'm just going to phone up everybody else. I'll get back to you later. It was like, I just didn't want to get engaged in that conversation any further. And we put down the phone. And it was really funny because, and here's the irony, because the phone call I had last with my younger brother, which is the one I thought was going to be the most tricky, and I was bracing myself, was the one that just flowed really well. So here's the thing. It's really difficult to predict the future. It's really worth knowing that. And then what happened was about, I don't know, the day later, the next morning, I got a text from my older brother just saying, hey, I'm really sorry. I think I flew off the handle. Can we reconnect? And that's what happens is when you understand the system, when you understand that, yeah, we get caught up in thinking, he got caught up in his thinking, it really genuinely was no big deal. Stuff settles, and then we reconnect. And then we deal with what needs to be dealt with. And that's what happened in that circumstance. So hopefully we've given you a little bit of a flavour of how we share this in schools with teachers and leaders. And so really what we're saying is like, there isn't such a thing as a challenging conversation. They're just conversations. The only challenge appears to us to be whatever it is you create in your mind around that conversation.